again. We hope you're staying healthy, and we welcome everyone to another Kent Seminar Series lecture. Today we have Professor Jonathan Hall from University of Toronto. There he is affiliated with the Transportation Research Institute, where he focuses his research in urban transportation. His current research focuses on design of road tolls and studying the effect of new transportation technologies. Professor Hall received his bachelor's from Brigham Young University and his master's and PhD from the University of Chicago in economics, I believe. And I have Professor Lee online today who will complement this introduction. Professor Lee.
Yeah, so well, welcome to UIUC. It's really special to have you here. So just a little introduction. So Dr. Hall is, one of the people that's really used like modern economics to shine a light on a lot of real topical questions pertinent to transportation, such as like whether or not Uber and transit or rideshare and transit are complementary or big substitutes. That's probably your highest cited paper, right? Yeah. And today he turns his analysis again to another practical problem of these message signs that you see on the interstate. So excited to hear. It's a different perspective than we usually see at the Kent seminar. So he's going to be using a lot of econometric techniques and statistics, the standard tools of economics. So hope that it kind of broadens our mind about how we look at the problems that are faced on our roadways as engineers. So Jonathan, thanks a whole lot for coming out. I really appreciate it. Jonathan Hall is a native son of Illinois. And so it's good to, although he's not sure if he's been to UIUC before, can't quite remember, but if he ever does come back to the state, definitely give us a holler here when things are more relaxed.
Great.
Sorry, Professor Hall, I just need to give some housekeeping reminders for everyone. Everybody could submit their questions on the chat box, or if you go to the participants tab and you click on it, you will see a raise hand button that you can use. Professor Hall will have 40 minutes for his presentation, and then we'll go to Q&A, and I can help you out with the questions there, Professor Hall. And with no further ado, Professor Hall, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
All right, so hopefully you can see my screen. We good?
Yes, sir.
So you guys at U of I are really fancy and are using a higher version of Zoom than the University of Toronto lets us use. So I'm doing this through my browser. So hopefully, we don't run into issues with that. But I should say I'm just super excited to be here with you guys. As Louis said, I grew up in suburban Chicago, and so like growing in high school, right? Like what was the coolest place to go for college was University of Illinois Engineering, right? Some is like we didn't have people going to Harvard, right? Maybe that would have been cooler, but people didn't go to Harvard from my high school, but like that was where like the best and brightest went. So to be here, like if I want to post on Facebook, like you guys wouldn't believe how cool I am. I got to go to University of Illinois Engineering today. I'm also excited because as kind of Louis hinted at, like I do this work between engineering and economics. And I think we have a lot we can learn from each other. And I love kind of tackling these questions that we both care about. And so I love getting your guys' feedback on how to make things better. So I want you to think of this not just as like, oh, this nice Professor Hall came and gave us a presentation on his work so we can learn about it. No, that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I want to hear what you guys think about how I can make my work better. So like I am anxious to get your feedback on how to improve this and look forward to getting your questions. All right, so we're going to start with the motivation that governments everywhere are really excited about behavioral interventions. And what do I mean by a behavioral intervention? This is an intervention that takes account of the fact that people are not perfectly rational, but instead that like just changes in the way you frame things or some new information can change the choices people make. So what are some classic examples A classic one is changing the default option. So imagine when you show up for a new job, right now, what the typical job has you do is you get a bunch of paperwork, right? You show up at your new job, and one of those things would be, hey, do you want to contribute to a 401k, a retirement plan? And if you don't turn that in, what happens? Well, right now, most places, if you don't turn that in, you're not contributing to your 401k. What if we change that to, you still have the form, you still have every right to make whatever choice you want, but if you don't turn it in, you're set up to be saving instead. Some of these are just about the way you frame choices, and a lot of them are simply about providing information, right? So a classic one that you guys might see on your power bills, I should have checked if it shows up in Illinois, at the top of your power bill, they'll just tell you how you compare to your neighbors, and they'll give you a smiley face or a frowny face if you're doing better or worse than them. And why do governments love these? Well, these are like easy to implement and avoid all of the political battles that you would get using an economist's typical answer of how should we change behavior, right? You ask an economist and we'd say, something's bad, tax it. If something's good, subsidize it. Okay, maybe in some cases you should regulate it, right? That's like the economist's default answer. And those lead to massive political fights. Hey, we should give someone some information. It's just much less controversial. And so governments are really excited about these. And they're so excited that they're using it. Over 150 governments around the world have started using these, and they even set up specific units in the government designed to like help say, hey, how can we take these insights from like psychology and economics and apply them? And so they often get called nudge units. The United States has one, England has one, a number of other places have these kind of teams. And when you look at the guidebooks on how to do these, there's two basically universal recommendations. First, your intervention should be salient. It should seize people's attention. Second, it should be timely. It should be implemented at the time people can take the desired action. Now, of course, there's a problem that if it's salient and timely, you might distract someone from a more important task, right? You're doing it right when they need to get it, but that might be a time that's not a good time to distract them. And so that's what we're going to show you happens. So this is joint. I should have mentioned this at the start. I'm sorry. This is joint with my good friend Joshua Madsen, who's at the University of Minnesota. So what do we find? We find that these behavioral interventions can be too salient. That is, they can distract you, right? So I do this behavioral intervention, I get your attention, and that distracts you, and that can cause the intervention to backfire. This matters for 4 reasons. First, when you're designing a behavioral intervention, it means you kind of need to pair up how salient the intervention is with the cognitive load that people have at that time, right? So like you wouldn't imagine you want to remind a brain surgeon to be more careful. You might tell him before he goes into the operating room, but you don't want to like in the middle of surgery be like, surprise, be careful. Like that's a bad idea. That's going to be the kind of situation we're going to talk about today. Another lesson that is probably obvious to all of us here is that it's really important to measure things. That you shouldn't just assume you know how something's going to work. And we're going to talk today about a behavioral intervention that's affected millions of people and has never been measured. And a fourth thing we learned from this is if you're doing a behavioral intervention, something that might distract someone, and you want to tell what are like the total effects of it, then you need to account for, did I distract them from something else? So, right, another common behavioral intervention is sending people text message reminders, right? So imagine you sending me a text message tonight at my kid's bedtime to brush their teeth. That's a great thing, and maybe it makes me brush their teeth more often. But what if it means I stop reading to them, right? And so you want to kind of account for that full effect. Now, I know you guys are all traffic people, and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Where's the traffic stuff? All right, here's the traffic stuff. Our setting is a traffic safety campaign that's being done in 27 states, where we take already existing digital message signs and we show on them the number of year-to-date fatalities. You guys have probably all seen this, right? Because they do it in Illinois. I understand with COVID, they've kind of replaced it with COVID messages over the deaths one. And why do we care about traffic safety? All right, you guys are probably the people I need to motivate the least for, but when I'm talking to my fellow economists, I point out that traffic fatalities are the leading cause of death of people 5 to 45 years old. So for most of you guys in my audience today, most likely way you're gonna die this year is a car crash. So this is like a big deal. And we just like car crashes are just part of life, right? Like it just happens. Like kills 39,000 Americans a year, right? So what's the student body of University of Illinois? I should know this. Sorry, I didn't look it up. I'm guessing it's around 40 to 80,000 in that kind of range, right? So think if half of the student body of U of I, University of Illinois, died this year, would that be like a big deal? Yeah. And we're just like, oh, car crashes, no biggie. Well, okay. So people in transportation like you and me know this is a big deal. And there's been a lot of work, zero fatality campaigns, Vision Zero campaigns to deal with this. And this has been a powerful tool they've used. I want to point out that these messages are intentionally salient, right? In Ohio, they describe them as being in your face. In Texas, they talk about them being a sobering new message, right? Like these messages are designed to get your attention. Because they're easy to do, 27 states have done some form of this since 2012. It started way out in the East, and then people saw it and were like, huh, that's a good idea. Let's do it too. People think these things work. First piece of evidence for that is 27 states are doing it. No one looked at it and was like, maybe, should we do this? Like, yeah, good idea. What could possibly go wrong? In our home state of Illinois, they noticed that roadside deaths were going up. So they had a meeting, pulled a bunch of different governments in. And there was one idea that had unanimous support. And what was it? Showing these messages. You can even ask drivers. You ask drivers, do you think these messages would help? And they tell you, yes, I would drive better if you showed me this message. You could even write a paper showing these signs cause more crashes and then send it to all the state departments of transportation and people that do it. And a state might respond, hypothetically, of course, no. A neighboring state of Illinois responded, at this time, our program is pretty popular. And there is a belief it is helping change the safety culture, which in turn will help reduce crashes in the long run. I should say, when we emailed the states, we said, hey, here we have this result. In a second, I'll tell you, we only use data on Texas. And so like maybe it doesn't apply to you. We will help you measure it. That was our pitch. Let us help you measure if this sign is working in your state. Do you know how many states responded with taking us up on that offer? No one. No one wanted us to help them tell whether these signs work. And we're going to find that these signs actually increase the number of crashes. So I mentioned we're going to study Texas. Why Texas? Big benefit of Texas is it's huge, right? So Texas has almost as many people as Canada, has over 800 of these digital message signs. And importantly for us, Texas shows these signs 1 week each month. Notice, in contrast, Illinois shows them all the time unless there's something else to show, right? So that means if you were to try to measure the effectiveness of these signs in Illinois, you'd have to do some sort of research design of like, hey, I know when it's on, I know when it's off, and I compare those times. But your worry is, well, why did they choose not to show it, right? There's some selection bias in what times they're showing it or not showing it, and that's going to bias your results. In this case, Texas is doing it 1 week a month. That week is set before, at the start of the program. They've been doing that ever since. And so now we know why it's showing that week versus other weeks. It's because that's how they designed the program. What do we find?
Can I ask, during that week, are they, is that the only thing that's being shown? And on other weeks, are they cycling through other stuff? Like what's the idea of just doing it once a week? Or once?
So you're right that they do show other things. So they show it about 30% of the time when it's supposed to be showing, right? And so I'm skipping it in the presentation, but in the paper, we show kind of what does it replace? And about a third of the extra time comes from time blank. And then a fair bit of it, I don't remember the exact numbers, that's the biggest category. But then the other 2/3 is like travel time messages or other safety messages.
And so any sense as to why they made this choice of only showing the fatalities once a week, or sorry, 1 week a month?
1 week a month. They don't talk to us anymore. They talked to us at the start when we were like, it's going to be a good thing. Yeah. And so I think the story is, and so a lot of states do this kind of design of 1 day a week or 1 week a month. So Colorado does Wednesdays. Iowa does something like the first Monday of the month. And I think the story is that these signs are a little creepy, right, a little bit disruptive. And so maybe we don't want to show it all the time because it's kind of a in-your-face message. But
Great. Thanks.
yeah. All right, so what do we find? First, weeks. So just compare the weeks where the signs are supposed to show versus other weeks in the same month. You get about 1 to 2% more crashes within 10 kilometers of a digital message sign. Now you say, well, they only showed about a third of the time. So what does that imply about how much showing a sign for an hour increases crashes? And so using instrumental variables, you can show that means it's about a 4.5 to 8% increase in crashes when you're showing the sign. And now you might think like, right, you guys are well-trained. You're taught to be skeptical. You don't believe anything anyone tells you just because they told it to you. And so your first thing is, look, yeah, these signs are surprising. So you see it and it shocks you, and maybe you drive worse today, but like the next time they show you the sign, you're used to it, right? You get used to this over time. Well, they've been showing it for 5 years. It's still having the same effect. People are not getting used to it. Why do we think this is happening? Our proposal is that these messages add to drivers' cognitive loads. It distracts them, and that crowds out their ability to drive safely. Your other thing you might say is, hey, Jonathan, look, you should think of these signs like a vaccine, right? You get the vaccine, it makes you sick for a few days, right? Like you get the flu shot, you're gonna get a runny nose. If you were to measure whether a flu shot helps by measuring the effectiveness of a flu shot in the first 4 days after you got it, you would conclude that flu shots were terrible, right? Because people report more flu symptoms the week after they got it than otherwise. You got to look at like a long run pattern. So I'm going to show you 5 different measures of trying to look at a long run effect, and none of them are like perfect, but we're pretty confident there's nothing going on. Finally, I just want to be upfront about this, that there's important heterogeneity. That is, do the messages always hurt? No. They help when the reported number of fatalities is low, and they help on really simple road segments. So take, a highway segment out in the middle of nowhere, cornfields on both sides, straight line, it's not causing a problem there. It only causes a problem when things are complicated, which I'm going to come back and tell you I think that fits into our mechanism, right? It's not, if I'm riding on a really simple road segment and you distract me, it's not a big deal. If it's really busy and crowded and complex and you distract me, that's when it's a problem. So how do we do this? Big picture is just think, let's compare outcome, number of crashes within a given distance during the campaign week versus the other weeks of the same month. And specifically, think of we're going to compare Tuesday at 2 o'clock in July of 2014, when the sign was assigned to be on, versus the other Tuesdays in the same month. Right. So I'm going to show you fancy regressions, but really, if you thought of this as like, I'm going to get in every month, I'm going to calculate this difference. Tuesday at 2 o'clock, sign on, sign off, do that for all the different hours and all the different months and average it. That's what we're doing. And we're going to do some weather and holiday stuff, but that's fundamentally what we're doing. To do this, we take a map of Texas, we locate all the digital message signs. We then geolocate all the crashes, and we find their distance to the DMS, right? So here's the crashes within 1 kilometer, 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers. I just want to highlight now, within 10 kilometers, there are more than 10 times the crashes within 1 kilometer because the road splits out. Now we're actually going to do something a little bit fancier than what I said. We're going to do something called differences and differences, where that first difference is exactly what I said. Difference during campaign weeks versus other weeks. But then a concern you might have is, well, why did they choose the week prior to our board meeting of the Texas Transportation Commission to show these signs? Why is that what they did? Is it because these weeks are more dangerous? So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same research design before they started showing the fatality messages. So they started in August of 2012. So let's use data from January 2010 to July 2012 and say, are these weeks any more dangerous? The answer is going to be no. We're going to find 0. And then we're going to because there's some uncertainty about whether that's a true 0, we then do this, that it ends up making our standard errors bigger. Then we throw in some controls for weather conditions and holidays. All right, here's how you write out the regression. we're going to collect a bunch of data on where crashes are, where board meetings are. The two things I want to highlight is that we did a lot of work to locate all the digital message signs. So Texas gave us a list. We were able to web scrape some, but ends up that they don't know where their own signs are. If you look at a map and look at them, they're not, 90% of them are right, but the other 10% are like way off. And so I had a small army of RAs, some of whom were small, including my own children, who helped me look on Google Maps and use Street View and find where all of these different digital message signs are. I will note, this is because like I'm working on it and they're like, oh, Dad, can I help? I'm like, absolutely, come look on Google Maps with me. We also have some limited data on what the signs are actually showing. So we don't know for the whole sample what is literally on the sign, just some of the sample. So before we do anything fancy, let's just do like what Warren here could do. What's the data analysis Warren could do? All right. So in this picture, what do I got? X-axis is distance to the digital message sign. So we have with crashes within 1 kilometer, 2 to 4 kilometers, 5 to 7 kilometers. Y-axis is going to be the change in crashes per hour. But this is literally average number of crashes per hour during treated weeks minus average number of crashes per hour during non-treated weeks divided by that base rate, right? There's like nothing fancy here. And so this is just a raw pattern that is just true. There are more crashes during the weeks when they're showing these signs. It's bigger at closer distances and starts declining as you get further away. We can do this really simple analysis and do some placebo tests. You might say, if it's because of the signs, then if we look upstream of the sign, we shouldn't see more crashes. All right, we can do that test. You're right, we don't see more crashes upstream. I do want to note that when you're doing that, these signs are often close together. And so you have to kind of limit your sample to places where there's not another sign right upstream. And that is not a random sample, right? That tends to be digital message signs on the outskirts of cities or in rural areas. The other thing, you can be like, well, what if I look in the pre-treatment period? Do I find additional crashes? The answer is no. You'll know I'm skipping a lot of figures. In the Q&A, ask about what you want to see. This is trying to like move along quickly. All right, so now let's do the fancy stuff where we have all these fixed effects. We have rain, we have holidays. First thing I want to show, so all right, this table, we have 3 columns. First column, crashes within 3 kilometers, crashes within 5, right? So 0 to 5, 0 to 10. This row here is what is the effect of it being the week before a board meeting in the pre-period when they weren't actually showing these messages. And what we find is a 0, right? We have a number that it's positive or negative, it's statistically insignificant. And then what happens? What happens in those same weeks, but now they're starting to show the message, is you get about 1.5, 1.4% more crashes. This effect is huge, given like that it's showing a sign. All right, if you do an adjustment for the fact that they only show the signs about 1/3 of the time, this says that showing a sign, turning that sign on, is increasing your crash rate about 4.5 to 8%. If you're like, well, all right, how should I think about a 4.5 to 8% increase in crashes? Well, that you would get the same kind of increase in crashes if you increase the speed limit by 3 to 9 miles an hour, if you decreased highway troopers by 12 to 24%, or if you encourage young adults to drink more by about 5 to 10%. That would give you similar effects. What is like the real life magnitude of this? We estimate that in Texas, this causes about an additional 2,600 crashes a year. Social cost of that would be about 400 million. We can't actually detect whether there's a change in fatalities, right? The good news is fatal crashes are a small share of all crashes, so we just don't have the statistical power to tell that. But if you assume the percentage change is the same, that's additional 16 people dying every year, right? This is like a big deal. What about like in all the 27 states that have done this? So this is like as back of the envelope as you can be. Like this is just some extrapolation. We would say that's about 16,000 crashes, 100 fatalities, and a social cost of over $2 billion a year. And I just want to point out, like, we all have great policy ideas to make the world a better place. Here's my policy idea. It's free. Stop showing the message, right? Like, this isn't complicated. This isn't hard. And if you're not willing to turn off the signs, will you at least let us measure it in your state and tell you if it's working there. Like, sure, you don't believe me. Let's do a randomized control trial on it. But to keep doing it when you have credible evidence that's killing people, yeah, I have issues with that. All right, but on to the science. Well, why? What's going on? What's causing this? We think it's that it's distracting drivers. What's our evidence for it? So I'm going to walk you through about 5 plots that get at our reasons why we think it's distraction. First reason, the harm done by the messages is increasing in the reported number of deaths. That is, when it's a small number, people are like, all right, keep driving. When it's a big number, it kind of freaks them out and it distracts them. So how do we show that? So what we have in this picture is what we do is we allow the treatment effect to differ by the quartile of the number on the sign. So this is just showing the regression coefficient in a figure. So here's quartile 1 when it's under 1,000, quartile 2, 3, and 4. And then again, we have the change in the crash rate. And you find when the number is below the median, the messages maybe even help, right? But when it's above median, when it's a big number, that's when it's really distracting. This means it's not just the signs being used, right? It's the literal content of the sign that matters. Now, these counts on the signs are climbing throughout the year. They reset in February and climb throughout the year. So closely related to that last plot is just to say, how does the effect differ by month? And the first thing I want to focus on is January versus February. So January, the number is really big. February, the number is really small. You see this big drop. Then throughout the year, the number gets bigger and bigger, and the effect size climbs. I'm going to ignore the summer for now. We'll come back to it. It gets bigger, 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 right? Like you just see this nice increase. All right, what's going on in the summer? I don't know. If you have any ideas, I want to hear of. We have tried so many things. So here is my best story, but I want to be clear, I'm not like super confident in this, is that in July, you get a lot more tourism. And so you have a lot of people who are driving on unfamiliar roads. And so we can show that there's a lot more tourism in July, but it's not like June doesn't have any tourism either, right? So that's like the hard thing with the explanation. August, I do like, oh, the treated week is back when schools are starting or something. I don't know. I'll just ask you this. When you're judging my presentation on this one figure, just say, if I'd plotted this by quarter, it would have looked perfect. But I was like, this whole, my mom taught me I should be honest. So I'm showing you the ugly part. This happens when you run stuff, not everything's perfect. But yeah, if you have ideas, we've just checked tourism, we've checked hurricanes, we've checked, everything we can think of, and we can't find anything that explains it. All right, next thing that makes us think it's distraction is that the fatality messages increase multi-vehicle crashes, but not single vehicle crashes. So first, what do I think that means? So all right, regression results first. Multi-vehicle in the first column, single in the second column. The part in orange, that's the treatment effect. No effect here, an effect there. Why do I think that says it's distraction? Well, I'm driving along, right? And I see the sign. What do I do as a result? I'm distracted. So maybe I drift out of my lane a little. Maybe I don't notice when the car in front of me puts on their brakes, right? And so these are like little errors. It's making me make little errors. It's not making me like drive off the road, right? It's not like, oh, the number's so big, I like spun off. No, it's making you drift out of your lane and then hit another car, right? These are like, the idea is that the typical multi-vehicle crash is a small error, where the typical single vehicle crash is a big error. Not, that's not like some sort of universal statement, but in as much as that statement's true, it would mean these are small errors leading to more crashes. Next, I want to show you get more crashes on more complex road segments.
So
we're going to do,
Jonathan, can you what's a single vehicle crash in this way? Like I don't actually get the intuition yet. Why would there be a difference?
Why would there be a difference? So how do you get in a single vehicle crash? You have to leave the road, right? And so that takes.
Oh, so the implication is that's like a big mistake.
Yeah. Okay. Where multi-vehicle crash could be caused by
small mistakes.
Small mistakes. Yeah. All right, complexity. So first, let me tell you about our 3 measures of complexity. First, and it's nice with engineers, I don't have to explain these terms in great detail. But since there's some economists, I still will. We're going to use 3 measures: center line miles. So that is just like go stand on the highway and start walking and count how many miles you walked, right? And remember the road splitting out. So this is measuring road segments where it splits more. Lane kilometers says you actually care about how many lanes were at each part. Vehicle kilometers traveled says we want to know the average annual amount of traffic on this road. So then the way this works is this measure, all right, these bottom 2, this says, all right, do you see any effect on average in the pre-period? Nope. This one says in the pre-period are places with that are more complex, do they see more crashes? The answer is no. Some of that's because we have segment fixed effects, right? We probably would, but we're controlling for that. All right, in the post period, do you see on average more crashes? Sorry, this is the key thing I forgot to say. This measure, we take this measure and we standardize it. So as mean 0, standard deviation 1. And this says on average, you see more crashes. And then this says, how does the number of crashes increase as you increase our measure of complexity? And as you make it more complex, you get more crashes. So that's what this is letting you see. What do we think this means? Well, if it's a complex road segment, your cognitive load is already high, right? And then I add a little bit of distraction, and that's a big problem. If instead, sorry, I'm seeing the chat box keep popping up. Yeah, economists, this is like for an economist seminar, this is like the most mild one ever. Complexity. So it's more complex, you distract me, that's a big problem. If it's a simple road segment, right? So take, like just looking at these numbers, take something that was 2 standard deviations below the mean in complexity, you would say that that is helping. Safety is improved by showing this sign. But on average, it hurts, and it hurts more on complex road segments. That says something about cognitive load being high. Next thing we can do is what about look at places where these signs are closer together? And again, we find, yep, there's more crashes when the signs are closer together. This one's harder to interpret. It could have multiple interpretations. One would be that signs are closer together, so you've been more treated, right? Like you've seen the sign twice, and that's more distracting. It could also mean that you see the sign doesn't show on every DMS, so you're just more likely to have been treated at all. But it's some measure that said, like, look, when you see the sign a lot, when you're more likely to see the sign, we see a bigger effect. All right, so this is why we think it's distraction. What are other stories that might explain what is going on? One is, probably the leading one, is this, it's like a vaccine, right? It hurts today, but you drive better the rest of the time as a result. Why do we think that's not the case? And I might show you some of these because we're doing pretty good on time. First, the days after the safety campaign ends are not safer than the others, right? So you think if this is a good vaccine, then I show you the sign, it's on for Monday through Sunday. The next Monday you get on the road, you're gonna drive really safely, right? Because you remember the message. Nah, doesn't happen. You might think, and just to be clear, that's like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And the sign, the magnitude, those things are positive or negative, right? Like there's just nothing going on. You might think, oh, people are gonna get used to it. They're not. And maybe your story is like, oh, it's because the drivers just turn over. I'm like, look, yes, there are new drivers every year on Texas roads, but like most drivers were driving there a year ago, right? Like we don't have this massive turnover in the population that would be like, oh, it's just new people being exposed. What if we look at statewide? Like, okay, look, maybe it's gonna hurt near the signs, but then you drive better the rest of the day. Statewide, we get the same results. Finally, you don't believe anything I've told you. You were like so skeptical. You're not buying any of it. Here's the simple fact. Whatever benefit this sign is giving is small compared to other trends because the number of fatalities per vehicle mile traveled has increased 6.2% since they started showing the signs. To be clear, I am not saying showing the signs is what caused this. I'm just saying if you think these signs are some magical, like are really helping, I mean, so you got to tell me what else has changed that's made things a lot worse, right? And it could be something else, But like, if this number had gone down, maybe you'd have some story. I do want to be clear. We've gotten some good comments of things like this isn't a perfect explanation, because what if the signs freak people out until they start buying safer vehicles? We can't detect that, right? There are some stories we can't rule out. But yeah. All right. In the paper, let's go to it. Oh no, my link didn't work. Just trust me. In the paper, we have like some alternative hypotheses. What's some of them? Maybe there's like a Peltzman effect, which is you see the sign and you say, oh, everyone else on the road is going to start driving more safely. Therefore, I can drive more dangerous. All right, maybe. The problem with that would be this is implying like a rational response. I just feel like we kind of ruled out rational responses. Another story would be, is there just more travel demand during these weeks? And so you can just look at VMT on Texas highways. There's no difference. We do a bunch of tests on that. Well, look in California. Is California a proxy? Nope, there's not more demand in California either. The other thing we do on is there just more demand those days? People have a million ideas. Are there more football games those weeks? Because in Texas, football games are a big deal. No, there's not more. We do a million robustness tests because economists can never get enough robustness tests. And then we also, I'm scared to click my link. All right, external validity. I just want to be clear of the limits of what we've done. So we find that most of the damage is done those first few days the sign's shown. And so maybe in a place like Illinois where they show it all the time, you do get used to it. It's a possibility, right? You see it every day, so it's not shocking you anymore. 2, we show that the message hurts when the number on the sign is big. And guess what? Everything's bigger in Texas, right? Including they lead the nation in traffic fatalities. So that nowhere else shows a number as big as Texas shows. So here's my question. If you're in Rhode Island or Wyoming and they show you this message, is the driver adjusting for population or not? It could just be it's a big number. And and so what would we need to do? We need to study this again in other places. Finally, I just want to be clear. This is the effect relative to the status quo usage of the sign, not the effect relative to blank. So depending on whether you think the other messages help or hurt, right? This is just something that's different. It's just relative to the status quo usage. Now that is the policy relevant thing, but it's still an important question. So what did I show you today? I showed you that showing fatality messages increases traffic crashes. I've shown you this has a heterogeneous effect. It's not the same everywhere. These messages help when the reported number of fatalities is low and the road segment is not complex. Why do we think this is happening? We think we're distracting drivers. And we know distracted driving is bad. Why does this matter beyond the context of traffic safety? Let me be clear. I think that itself is super important. But are there broader lessons we can learn? Well, we're really excited these days about these behavioral interventions. And we know that these things have to have cognitive costs. And we're showing that it can crowd out other more important considerations, making things worse. What should you take away if you're designing a behavioral intervention? Just match the salience with the people's cognitive load, right? So look, if you want to give someone a shocking message when they're sitting on an airplane, just sitting there, sure, go ahead, shock them. If you want to shock someone when they're driving, I don't know, maybe not the best idea. The thing that I'm sure is obvious to all of us is you got to measure. And I think that some people have been don't say this in your presentation, in your paper. And I'm I wouldn't if I didn't think that message didn't need to get out. We need to repeat that message over and over again to policymakers because there's barriers to doing measurement, right? Measurement costs money, it takes time. And so it's understandable they don't always want to do it. And we need to be hey, you got to figure out if this thing's working because we have reason to think it might be killing people. This isn't, this is serious stuff. You got to measure whether it works. And then finally, if you're going to do a program evaluation of a behavioral intervention, you got to think about my behavioral intervention. It's affecting domain X. is it having spillover effects to other areas? All right, so thank you very much. I look forward to your questions and comments, and yeah, take it away.
Thank you, Professor Hall. This was a very exciting presentation. I believe you're a great speaker, and you had me hooked the whole time. We have several questions. I'm going to start with Professor Adam Osman, who has his hand raised. You can mute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, so no, this was great. Thanks, Jonathan. Coming back to this point of what else is on the sign, like the status quo, I think that's a really important consideration. And you mentioned that, did you guys, oh, there it is. So is this coming from, where are these data coming from?
So we have data for Houston for 2012 and 2013. And then we have for the entire state, 2016 and 2017. And so.
And this is like broken down by like minute or something. Like I'm wondering, do they also have, for instance, other things that they're showing in the second week? And can you do analysis on, what is the impact of this type of information that is only shown in the second week or something like that?
So just, so like, are there other weeks that have unique things? Or you're saying what other things are different about treated weeks?
So I love experiments, right? So like what I'm thinking is, well, okay, fine. Right now, you're showing that this type of information is leading to this negative impact, right? So maybe there's other types of information, and you're implying, in fact, right, that could lead to positive impacts, right? And you're implying that, in fact, when the numbers are small. So I'm wondering, what's the impact of the travel time alerts, right? And you can look at heterogeneity there, these amber alerts, and look at heterogeneity there. If, obviously you can't run all those experiments, but do you have quasi experiments in what they're showing and when and how often?
Yes. So first on the experiment, let me just say, if anyone from Illinois State is here, we'd love to partner with you and do it. So I don't know who comes to these things, but that was our offer to these people. And we said, Texas, all right, we think this is going on. Can you just turn it off in half of the districts?
Right.
And nail down the experiment. Yeah. We've gotten 0 takers. On the quasi-experimental, so we do that. First, let me just say, we can document pretty severe selection problems. That is, focusing just on fatality messages, but it shows for others. If there is an accident, the fatality message will turn off before an accident occurs. And you're like, whoa, traffic engineers can see the future. No, it's that this is about reported accident time, right? And so you look at when accidents are reported, and a whole lot of accidents are reported on the hour and on the half hour and on the 15, right? And so there's rounding. And so it looks to us like they're turning it off before the sign. They turn off the sign before the accident comes. That in many of these cases makes it look like if you just do the OLS, these signs help. And then you can document the selection problem. And you can even try to fix, and so it makes us not trust any of our quasi-experimental. The one we were hopeful for was, Amber Alerts are pretty exogenous, right? Like Amber Alerts, these are the messages shown when someone's kidnapped. Right, so some traffic engineer isn't being like, I think accident risk is high. Let's not show an Amber Alert, right? You show an Amber Alert. And for those, I'm having a hard time remembering our exact result because it's changed. At one point, we found they cause more crashes. But then I think when we fix some things, that might have gone away.
Great, thanks.
So now I see Professor Hodge. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Jonathan. This was a really interesting presentation to me. And as a survivor of these vehicle messaging signs in Texas, messaging signs in Texas, I can probably answer the question about what's on them the rest of the time. Most of the time, it seems to be don't mess with Texas messages about littering. No, I might be remembering this wrong, but because it's been so many years since I took classes to do with traffic safety and those kind of things during my master's. But I do remember seeing a study that if you get a message on a back in the day, it was like Garmin GPSs. Not everybody was using their phone as their GPS at that time. There was a study, I think it was from Australia, that did show that those messages popping up was distracting, and I think was the equivalent of sending a text message in terms of of increasing risk of having a crash. So I wonder if, in terms of kind of the literature and the things that you saw as you were doing this, was there any thought as to the message being outside the vehicle? Is that considered? Because I think if anybody paused to read a text message on their phone, we would agree that that's distracted driving. So I wonder if these DOTs or kind of implementers of this policy thought about, is just it being outside the vehicle enough to justify that this is not distracting, or how did they square that away, I guess?
So that is a great question. So first I'm going to try to find this GPS study. Yeah, I want to find this. Certainly there's a literature looking at billboards. I don't feel like I've seen a literature, I haven't seen, but maybe I wasn't looking in the right places, for a discussion of in-vehicle versus out-of-vehicle trade-offs. Certainly, like, I've talked to someone who was high up in Michigan DOT, and he was like, yeah, we've been really hesitant to use these, we make these things, but to use them for anything other than like high priority messages, because we're worried about distraction. California is another place that is somewhat muted in their use of the signs. They have them, but they try to only, like, they don't just display random safety messages. And then on the billboard study, yeah, you do have, there's mixed evidence on how distracting billboards are. You get some of these vehicle simulator studies, which are really cool, because then you know everything, that show that like digital billboards can be distracting and cause more crashes. It's nice because with the simulator study, you can measure things like, they regulate their speed worse. You get these really detailed measurements. Any of you guys have a simulator? We talked to someone at Toronto who has one, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll put it on the list of ideas for grad students, and I'll let you know if anyone takes it up. I'm like, all right, I don't know when that'll happen, but maybe someday. Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much.
Great, thanks.
I have Professor Lee with his hand raised.
John, one tip is that, your colleagues at Minnesota, they have a good simulator there. Right. To point out. Anyway, so I wanted to actually, I have a few questions, but I'll ask them, when we meet. But I think a really valuable thing for the audience that is mainly composed of engineers, and many of them go on to work in some capacity, in the decision-making capacity. So one of the things that I'm interested in is if you could talk about the process of writing this paper, like briefly, like how long did it take you to, how much time did you spend just in the data collection stage, and how much time did you, once you got the data, how long did you spend on the data analysis and then on the writing and such? Can you just, I know that's a broad question, but recap and talk about what it takes to write a paper like this? I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah, so 4 children have been born between me and my co-author since we started this project. So the story of the project is, it's 2012. My co-author, so we're both PhD students. He's on the job market and sees this sign. Now he's actually an accounting PhD. And so accountants worry a lot about disclosure of information. He's like, oh, this is information disclosure. And so he's like, Jonathan, you do transportation, I do information. We like each other, let's write a paper together. And so that was the start. But then that's 2012, it's 2021. And so a lot of the time, there's a lot of delays in academic work of just like other things take higher priority. Like when I was on the job market, I didn't work on it at all. But there was just massive data processing with this. And so for this one, getting the data on crashes was really easy. You could download that. Figuring out where the signs were took a lot of work. Like, I still think my co-author doesn't quite appreciate. He's like, oh yeah, Jonathan had his RAs do it. I'm like, yeah, it's never quite that easy, right? Like I spent hours on Google Maps. I know Texas so well. And
Jonathan, to be clear, that this is the only paper coming out of this project. Over those 8 years, there haven't been a series of papers. This is just, the one, but it's 8 years on one paper, right?
Yeah, it's not.
Are you trying to make me feel bad? Or
No, I'm not.
I'm just joking.
Yeah, I'm just bringing up the difference in a little bit of the difference in cultures of practices of how things are done. That this is not that uncommon to spend that much time on it in your field.
So so just getting like the code to do like to get driving directions between all of them, right? I had like 28 servers running on Amazon, and it still gets it down to like 2 or 3 days to like get the driving directions for all of them. And so what then? All right, data collection, was like years of work. Data analysis is a long time because we're dealing with a massive data set. So anytime you run a single regression is like 10 minutes. But of course, like, like you're running all sorts of things. And so figuring out, getting the basic result was pretty quick. But then all this things like, okay, well, in economics, you can't just be like, oh, these signs hurt. They're like, okay, why? Well, then, so we spent a bunch of time talking to psychologists, traffic safety people, trying to make sure that when we went, what we didn't want to do was be like, let's just try a bunch of things and see which things are statistically significant. What we want to do is say, here is what science says we should test, and then test those things. And so we did the legwork up front to like go talk to people so that we could be like, here's what psychology says, here's what traffic safety says. And then, the paper, I don't know if you guys have seen the physical document, it's 80 pages. And a lot of that's tables and figures. And, Adam here is laughing because he's the one who referees these kind of papers where you show up and you're like, it's a novel. They sent me a novel.
Yeah, a lot of econ papers, right? They're almost books at this point. With the amount of stuff that they make us do.
Yeah,
but it sounds like a big part of it.
The paper to be published.
Sorry, can you ask that again, Lewis?
I was just asking, when do you expect the paper to be published?
When?
Yeah.
Or where? When?
Yeah.
Honestly, if it's published in 3 years, I'll consider that a success. My fastest turnaround, so this is engineering versus econ. My fastest turnaround is 1 year. 1 year from first submission to in print.
Okay.
And it got in at the very first journal. And this one, I expect that I'll be talking about it in 2024. Sorry, got my decade around.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so you made this point about measurement. Is there, specific types of data that are just like often not available that you think would be great, like for these governments to make available to researchers?
So in this case, what could governments do? So governments could do a lot more open data stuff. Like Texas, the only reason we can download the traffic crash data is because a reporter tried to get it and they said no, and he sued them over freedom of information law, and now it's available, right? But like this isn't something that they want to make available. Getting we wanted data on, so I told you like travel demand isn't higher during these weeks than other weeks. We had asked politely for the data from their loop detector data several times. I even talked to a friend at UT Austin, how would I get this? She's like, you can't. They won't give it to you unless you're working with them. And then we filed a freedom of information law request, and actually it ended up showing up 2 weeks later. I was like, whoa, I didn't think this would work. They could be a lot more open with their data. And so like, if you're doing transportation stuff, like California has this awesome website, you can get tons of data. And I think more states should be like that in making that data widely available. In this case, what we really want to do is one of them to work with us to do an experiment. That's the dream. And it wouldn't cost them anything. That's the thing. Like, just let us randomize what goes on this side. Yeah.
I'm waiting to see if I see some more hands raised. I still see Professor Lee, but I believe that's from earlier. I did have a question or a comment. Were you interested in other signs that were not fatality signs, because in particular, I'm thinking about here in Illinois, sometimes I've seen these signs display messages with jokes about wearing a seatbelt or about drinking and driving. And I've always thought about this. This is more distracting than it is focusing in driving.
Absolutely. The big thing we need is exogenous variation in when the signs are shown. And that's the difficulty. That is, right now, I mean, this was actually an exam questions my students had on Tuesday in my program evaluation class. Imagine you just did a naive analysis of the jokey signs. And here's what you're probably going to find is that they help. And the reason is because during peak travel periods, they're more likely to show a travel time message than a safety message, right? And so that means these signs show up a little bit more often when travel demand is low, when traffic conditions are better, and when there's fewer crashes, even just on because there's fewer vehicles on the road, right? Just like not BMP adjusted. And so it'll look like these signs help. And so what you want to do is talk to Illinois and say, here's what we want you to do. Just only show the safety message 1 week a month. We're good. Or only like randomly show it, like let me randomly choose which hours it's shown and we're good, right? Like it's not that hard to do, but the big thing you need to look for is this exogenous variation rather than just using the raw correlation you see in the data, because that is often plagued by selection bias. Into which hours are they choosing to show that sign? And I'm very interested in that. And I actually totally thought, I have this paper, I'm going to email all the states. Half of them are going to write back to me and say, yes, help us, Jonathan. And I'm going to get this next cool, I had that next cool paper outlined that I was going to run with them. And I made a new folder in my inbox to put all my responses. And we got 3 responses, one from Illinois' neighbor being like, oh, we love our signs, they work. 2 from states who are like, thanks for letting us know, we had previously stopped showing the signs. And so that was it. Most places ignored us.
Well, I sure hope they stop ignoring you when they realize what you're saying.
Yeah. So we're going to take it to TRB to try to like, let's get this in front of them. And
that does sound like a good venue for that.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any? I think we have a question from Isaac. Isaac, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for this nice presentation. The topic is really nice, and everybody can correlate to this because we see these signs all the time. I have just one question related to, like, just as a follow-up of what you mentioned now regarding getting the response from DOT. Did you try other sources other than government sources? Because I think there might be some organization they are maybe related to safety or something related to this that might have some insights on this.
So that is a good suggestion that I had written down at one point and not done. So thanks for the reminder. Like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or the insurance, what's the Insurance Safety Institute? Sorry, there's some insurance group who work to make road safety that we should send it to them. We did try really hard to get media attention in Texas. And I thought this would be a story they'd be interested in, and we can't get anyone. We got one news story in Utah, and no one else could we get interested in it. But no, thanks for the reminder to reach out to like Mothers Against Drunk Driving or the insurance people, because you're right, they would be interested. There's actually a bigger thing. I don't know. I feel like somehow I present this in a way that engineers don't like, because so this year at TRB, I sent it in and we were rejected over, I mean, what I thought were whatever. Of course, everyone when they're rejected thinks it's stupid, but and then I sent it, someone reached out on Twitter and said, hey, you should send this to this. There's this big safety conference. I'm blanking on its name right now. Lifesavers, this big safety conference. He's like, I'm on a different committee in it. And so we did it and they also rejected us. And I don't know if it's just like too technical. For the engineers, I tried making it more engineer friendly. One of the complaints was our conclusion was too short. I was like, really? You reject my paper because the conclusion is written too short. You have a page limit, people. Yeah, so thoughts on what I need to do to make it compelling to engineers are actually very appreciated, because somehow engineers just, I mean, hate me, but you guys don't hate me, right?
Professor, we have a hand raised by Bill Babrick, and that would be the last question for today because we ran out of time.
Sounds good. Jonathan, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed, and I enjoy these. I've been coming to back when I was a student at the university, of course, these were all in person. Now, of course, we all get to meet online, and we get a diverse perspective, and it's been several decades for me, but I'm glad to see economists dabbling in our world of transportation, as I've seen a few other outsiders come in over time. One of the places you might want to look for opportunities for funding and changing the story is the AAA Association for Highway Safety Research. AAA, everybody knows about as like, it used to be the place you go when my grandmother in the 80s would get these little flip maps when we were about to go on vacation of how to drive from one place to the other. But they actually have a foundation. They're a not-for-profit. They have a foundation where they take all their monies and they sponsor research projects. And they will do some things that are a little outside the norm. And I think what you're experiencing, no different than, I've done a fair amount of work in human factors. And I've worked with some cognitive scientists, and I've tried to bring them into highway safety studies to understand how and why people think and how and why they drive the way they do. And most of the engineering community, and I'm one of them, I'm an engineer, graduated from Illinois, but they didn't embrace, cognitive science. They didn't embrace, the highway engineering and roadway engineering community is not quick to embrace non-engineers. So I think you're going to struggle with that for a while, but I do appreciate the work that you're doing and finding some venues to try and put your work so that it gets out there, maybe in smaller snippets, not 80-page papers, as maybe engineers are getting bored. But I love the analysis. I love what you're doing. We have some great natural experiments that happen on our roadways, and boy, if we could just do some randomization of some of these things, it would be awesome. And I think we'd get some great results. But yeah, you got to convince somebody that's possible. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bill.
So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Professor Hall, again for the excellent presentation. We're going to wrap it up here today and hope to see you guys next week.